We're back in another edition of the First and Short podcast with JJ and the Goose. Oh, JJ, what happened in that State Carolina game?
Fire O'Brien, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's obviously the cry on Facebook.
Well, here's the thing. Why the fuck are you punting to a guy who's as dangerous as Giovanni Bernard with 13 seconds left in a game? Like, why are you not punting out of bounds there?
I mean,
not to mention they've punted like 4 times earlier in that game, and he hadn't had much of a return yet. He had to call fair catch on a bunch of them. And you knew he wasn't going to call for a fair catch. Like, let's be honest. Guys like that don't call for a fair catch when they have a chance to win the game right away.
I disagree. I think in a situation where the Gunners got down and got on top of him, he would have fair catched the ball. I mean, I agree with you. He should have kicked the ball out of bounds, but more, curious to me is why Tom O'Brien played it so safe down the stretch. They had time when they started that possession. Glennon had a great game. Why not try to come down and win the game before going to overtime? I mean, overtime's such a crapshoot. You had an opportunity, and you just gave it away after, your team was obviously, reeling in the fourth quarter. So I don't understand why he thought his chances were better in overtime than going ahead and taking a shot at it then. Very curious play call to me.
Well, I'll be the first to criticize O'Brien, but in that situation, actually, the plan, with a minute and a half left, they got the ball, I think, on their own 25. I think it was a touchback. They were going to try and go for it, but they got sacked on first down, and they were just... And when you get that far behind the down and distance, you might as well just run the ball and try and get the clock out. They ran the ball on second down. They got a few yards. Then they threw an incompletion on third, I believe, that wouldn't have picked it up anyway if he'd caught it.
Mm-hmm.
So then they had to punt. Carolina had one timeout. Here's what I'm saying, though. You stop Bernard. Carolina still gets the ball with like 18 seconds left. I don't know, were they on their own 30, 40-yard line? I'm not even sure how far he took that last one. But, I mean, you got to think about it this way. You got a guy back there who is easily the best athlete in the game, and he went 74 yards. So if he had called for a fair catch, we're talking about they're on their own 26-yard line. Like, geez, it was actually Bauman's best punt of the day. But he clearly outkicked his coverage. It was a 52-yard punt, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know. Do they do the rugby punt? Because that would have been the time.
They do not do the rugby punt. And another thing is, I thought for sure Carolina was going to come after that one. It would make a lot of sense on third and long, because even if they had bumped them, it would have only been 5 yards.
Yeah, if
they would have re-kicked.
If there's ever a time for the rugby punt, that's the time. I mean, obviously, hindsight 2020 should have kicked the ball out of bounds, but punt returns for touchdowns are really random. And I mean, it's obvious. Yeah, at the end of the game, 13 seconds. Say you punt it out of bounds at their 40. You're still, they would have to have a pretty amazing play to get in the field goal range, and basically one play and have to get up and spike it or get out of bounds. So it's just terrible luck.
And they were going into the wind. So Carolina had already missed a field goal that direction in the game.
Yeah.
But, yeah, O'Brien said after the game they hadn't practiced directional kicking all year. Seriously?
Yeah,
what the fuck does a punter do all day practicing that much if he hasn't done any directional kicking? Does he just punt the ball every time? Like in practice? Does he do that for 2 hours or whatever practice is?
Seems to.
I know it's longer than that.
Seems to be that way. More curious to me is, into the third quarter, Underwood gets the 55-yard touchdown pass. State's up 10. Things are looking good. What would happen in the fourth quarter that allowed Carolina to reel off 18 straight points? State had been moving the ball all day until the fourth quarter. What the hell happened then?
That's when State started to try and run some clock, and they couldn't do it. Obviously, if you look at the numbers, they could not run the ball. Creasy was their best back. He only got 66 yards on 14 carries. A 4.7 average will kill the clock, though. But they weren't getting it down the stretch. They tried to run the clock, and they were really conservative the whole fourth quarter. Except for one drive. There was one drive where they were not conservative, and that was with about 5 minutes left. They were up by 3. They went 3 and out 3 incompletions, killed no clock, which set up that last drive for Carolina that got the field goal to tie the game.
Mm-hmm.
That was where you were supposed to run the ball. That was the extra minute and a half there.
Yeah.
Right there. Even if you don't get a first down, that's a minute and a half. Or if you run the ball twice and then throw an incompletion, that's 50 seconds.
Well, even then, they're still going to overtime, and you don't know what's going to happen in overtime. I mean, but if you have a 10-point lead going into the fourth quarter, status quo says you ought to win the game. Another thing to look at is the turnovers. 2 fumbles lost, 2 interceptions thrown, to -2 in the turnover gap. So that's never a good sign for winning percentages.
Yeah, Carolina capitalized.
But
most of them.
My biggest takeaway from this is, I like State over Carolina. I was glad they won 5 in a row, but I think I told someone, before the game, regression to the mean. NC State is not supposed to beat Carolina 6 years in a row in football. They're not supposed to beat them 5 years in a row, for that matter. I mean, it was about damn time that, the random game of football broke UNC's way. I believe it was last year where State won the game partially due to a fourth quarter pass that was deflected by a Carolina player, a ball that was going out of bounds, by the way, deflected back into play and caught by an NC State receiver. I mean, you can't.
That was 2 years ago.
Okay.
Russell Wilson, on 4th and goal from the 2
years ago,
where he ended up all the way back at the 20 and just kind of heaved it.
State had no business winning that game. None. In fact, I believe they got a random punt return late in that game as well.
Yeah, they won the game on a punt return by T.J. Graham, who now plays for the Buffalo Bills.
So, for me, as not someone who's concerned really with UNC or State, but certainly, anti-UNC, they had to get one eventually. I mean, Tom O'Brien's streak against Carolina is well documented and well deserved, but at the same time, football's random. You're not going to beat your rival every year, and sometimes, the weird plays aren't going to break your way like they have in the past for State. So, moving forward, where does this now place State's football season? I mean, going into the game, NC State was actually in control of their own destiny. Now, no longer the case. What's the new goal for State?
Well, if you're State, obviously your goal is to win out. And if you win out and Florida State loses again, you can get back in. You win the Atlantic. If you win out and Florida State loses once,
that's a big.
NC State goes.
Tall order.
That's not going to happen. Florida State. Well, there's one game that if you're a State fan right now, you have to circle and say Virginia Tech can win this game on a Thursday night at Lane Stadium over the Noles. That's the one you need.
Well, I'm talking about NC State winning out. I mean, their schedule.
I'm saying, but if NC State wins out, they don't win the Atlantic. So if they want to win the Atlantic, Florida State has to win or has to lose one, and State has to win out. And then there's tiebreakers all over the place, which I believe State would win because they have not lost the game to an Atlantic Division team. But realistically, State's going to lose at Clemson. State never beats Clemson and Florida State in the same year. It hasn't happened in a long time. And they're not going to win in Death Valley. And the Tigers are going to have revenge on their mind after State walloped them last year in Raleigh. So I think Clemson wins that one. And then State plays maybe the 3 worst teams in the ACC, starting this week with Virginia at home. They also have Wake Forest and Boston College left. So you're thinking they win those 3 and they lose at Clemson, that's an 8-4 season. It would also be 5-3 in the ACC, which would tie their school's best record in the ACC since expansion, which would tie them with the Phillip Rivers year where they collapsed down the stretch.
Well, as you say collapse, I believe those 3 losses were to Georgia Tech, Florida State, and Clemson, 3 of the better teams in the conference that year. I don't know if it was...
one was to Maryland.
Oh, Maryland. That's right.
One was to Maryland.
I'll say it wasn't Clemson. It was Florida State, Georgia Tech, and Maryland. I wouldn't call that a collapse. I think that was just them finally playing the better teams in the conference. But
well, they had beaten Matt Schaub in Virginia that year, too.
I mean, obviously that was State's best team, but, I don't think they were as good as they might have been hyped up to be. But
right, but I think that's what's going to be the case this year. So if State...
So what bowl game...
If State wins the game that they're favored in, they'll finish 8-4. Coming into the year, you look at that schedule, you're thinking with no NC State shit, that's a 10-2 team right there. And then they lost to Tennessee, and you're looking at that schedule and you're saying, well, this is still a 9-3 team. And now you're looking at it and you're saying, This is looking like an 8-4 team.
Well,
As you
I think when you looked at the beginning of the year and you thought State was going to go 10-2, I think that's the State fan in you and the State fan in everybody who has
but I think
exorbitant,
if you
you know, expectations
but
for their
if you
team.
looked at the schedule, State should have been favored in 9 of the 12 games.
Okay, maybe, but here's my counter: do the favorites always win, and why do we play the games?
Well, that's a good point. But again, you're looking at this. Tom O'Brien saying this was his best team coming in.
What's he
You know
what's he
what?
supposed to say? This is my worst team. I don't believe in them.
Hey, he hadn't said that before. So let's say that.
I think
He said it was better.
I think every coach comes in the year thinking, man, this could be. Everybody thinks this could be a really good year at the beginning of the season. Like, I don't want to debate.
I guarantee you, Jeff Fazelik's not saying that right now.
Well, here's my point. I think State's going to finish 7-5, 8-4, right where they should be, right where State belongs.
Write it down. They go 7-5, and O'Brien's gone.
Really? You think if you go 7-5, they go 4-4 in the conference, they're going to fire O'Brien?
I think at 7-5, that's not going to get it done. That would mean he still has to lose to one of the worst teams in the ACC down the stretch, along with the loss.
It took a losing.
So it would be typical State for them to go 8-4. Beat Clemson and lose to like Boston College or someone down the stretch.
It took a losing record in conference and in the regular season for Checkamotto to get fired. I mean,
he was 3-9.
Yeah, exactly. My point. So that's a tall. I'm not ready to say O'Brien is going to get fired, and I certainly don't think he should be fired. I saw that was all over the Facebook after that game. Just fire O'Brien, worst coaching ever. And while I don't think it was a well coached game down the stretch, and I think O'Brien, has some blame in that. State fans being way too critical of this guy.
By the way, Tom O'Brien didn't drop 8 passes in that game, and Glennon put him right on the money. These aren't drops that were difficult catches either.
Yeah, no,
that's not on coaching. Dropping passes is not on coaching.
All shout-outs to Glennon, by the way. I've been quite critical of him, and I thought he played the best game I've seen him play. Really impressed by what he did.
He looked like a guy who should be in the first round.
Yeah, no.
As he was expected to be.
Good game by him. Saturday. But yeah, I don't think Tom O'Brien's gonna get fired this year. And
what if they finish 6-6? What if they go 1-3 now?
Oh, now you're up in the ante here. I mean,
well,
that would be very disappointing. I don't know. I mean, is he on that short of a leash right now? I mean, I feel like Tom
with Debbie Yao, you gotta think he would be at 6-6.
Tell me this.
Is that not? Is 6-6 in football not the same as going to the NIT?
I mean, it's not a good season, even by state standards. I mean, I think if you're a State fan, 7-5, 8-4 ought to be the benchmark for what is and what is not a good season. That is, traditionally, for them, that's a good season. I mean, State's only won 10 games once in our lifetime. 7-5, 8-4 is the standard. So that's the realm they should be judged in. And by the way, if you fire Tom O'Brien, who the hell's going to come in and just turn this place around? Remember how eager people were.
But they don't need a turnaround. You fire a coach after he goes 8-4, do you need a turnaround?
Then why are you firing him?
Because you need a change of pace, and they've got a guy who doesn't have much left in his career anyway.
Again, tell me who, because the last time State was up on their fucking soapbox trying to get someone fired, it was Herb Sendek after he'd taken them to 5 straight NCAA tournament appearances. And when they didn't fire him, they walked him out the door.
Yeah, they didn't run him out. They walked him out.
Walked him.
Then they tossed him.
Yeah, and then who'd they hire? How'd that go? Oh, that's right. Well, they didn't go back to the tournament for.
But don't be one of those guys who says they fired Sendek for Sidney Lowe. That's not how that worked. That was just a disaster of a coaching search.
Well, this is my point.
This wouldn't be a disaster of a coaching.
Just drooling at the opportunity to coach North Carolina State Wolfpack, a middle-of-the-pack ACC team. They're just not, man. Who? Tell me who.
Bobby Petrino.
Bobby Petrino? I mean, honestly.
Oh, I don't think they would hire Bobby Petrino.
I don't think they'd hire Bobby Petrino. Bobby Petrino, I mean, that's actually, I mean,
they wouldn't hire Bobby
Petrino. I don't know that his next coaching job will be in a BCS school, so he actually, I mean, if I was him, I'd have to consider it. But yeah,
I don't think State wants that baggage.
That would be a bad PR move.
But I think if State were to let go, I've said this before, here's your name, James Franklin.
I'm not familiar with that name.
He's the head coach at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's really not having a lot of success. He is bringing in top 25 recruiting classes to Vanderbilt, though.
So you think?
And Vanderbilt's not much easier of a place to recruit than Duke is. Let's be honest. They also have high academic standards, but they are in the SEC.
Yeah, so the guy's going to leave a head coaching job in the SEC to take a job in the ACC. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it.
Well, hold on. Here's James Franklin, a guy who was named the coach in waiting at Maryland when Debbie Yao was there. Debbie Yao, now the athletic director at NC State.
That's solid connection.
There you go.
Solid connection.
There you go. But here's what I'm saying. But going back to Maryland for a second, here's where I worry is if State goes 8-4, like I expect they will.
Yeah.
And then they'll lose in the bowl game to whatever like 8th best Big East team they play, because it seems like ACC has done a really good job making sure all their bowl matchups line up with the Big East. So when State does that and they lose to, I don't know, Pittsburgh or Syracuse, I don't know if those teams are even going to bowl games, but when that happens and you finish 8-5, if you fire the coach, right?
Dumb.
Now we're saying, I'd say 8-5 is a good year.
For State, absolutely.
Not with the schedule they played this year, but I'd say in general, 8-5 for NC State, not terrible. You lose the bowl game. Or even if they win the bowl game, they'd be 9-4, and then you certainly can't fire.
I think they'll win the bowl game. State's got a pretty good bowl resume.
When Russell Wilson doesn't get knocked out in the first quarter, they do pretty well in bowl games. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know why you're down in their bowl game.
So if they were to win the bowl game, so say they win the bowl game, they go 9-4.
He ain't getting fired.
But yeah, he ain't going anywhere. But at 8-5, then you can think about it, especially if there's a crappy bowl turnout. And then it's a real, State travels well. Don't get me wrong. But if there's a crappy bowl turnout from the State fans, and a lot of it can be attributed to, well, people don't like O'Brien. Let's be honest. The hardcore State fans don't like O'Brien. Do they appreciate his record against Carolina? Yes. But then when that record against Carolina is not continued, you saw it come out of the woodworks this week.
But this is my point, though. The reason they're not happy with O'Brien is because their expectations are out of fucking whack with the reality of the situation. NC State thinks of itself and wants to think of itself as a top 25 program in this country. I got news, folks. Top 40 is a lot more realistic. And maybe even top 50. It's a solid team, but it is by no means elite. It's never been a top 25 program on a consistent basis. And I don't know why anyone expects that it someday just magically will become a top 25 program.
I think it's fair to think they can become a top 25 program. Being a top 15? No, I don't think that's realistic at all.
How many top 25 programs are in the SEC
It's really not that hard to be a top 25
How many top 25 programs are in the SEC right now? 3? I would contend that even though Virginia Tech's having an off season, I'd call them a top 25 program.
Oh,
and I'd give Clemson and Florida State that. And I wouldn't give Miami that credit right now.
I wouldn't give Miami that now, but I would have
5 years ago. Yeah. And I'll tell you this: I think Miami's a better program than State, and I think Miami's got more potential when it comes to getting back.
Miami should slap themselves for saying they should be a top 25 program because they should be a top 15, top 10 program.
Okay, well that's my point.
Because that's what they have been historically. But NC State's not Miami, but it's really not that hard to be a top 25 program in football. Is it really that hard? State finished in the top 25 last year.
It's so damn easy.
Is it really that hard?
It's so damn easy to finish in the top 25 every year. Why haven't they been doing it, JJ?
Because they don't have the right coach.
Oh, but because you know what? Nick Saban probably coach them. I bet they'd be a top 25 program then. Hey, maybe y'all can get Urban Meyer. Yeah, you're right. I think there are big-time coaches. Yeah, if y'all got the right coach, could NC State be a top 25 program? Obviously. The question is the right coach going to want to come to State and stay at State for a long time? I mean, the best chance I thought y'all ever had was with Cowher. And I mean, if someone could...
I don't think Bill Cowher ever had interest in coaching.
I don't think he did either. But if he was, if that's the type of person, that's the type of name that could come in with the recognition, who could recruit on the level that State's going to need to be a top 25 program, and he's someone, because he went there, has a connection, and possibly would have the loyalty to stay there and see it out. I mean, say NC State got the next Nick Saban or got the next Urban Meyer. He's going to leave after 4 years. And State's not the type of team that has the name and the tradition behind it that another coach is going to come in and they're going to continue that. I mean, and I think other teams can go through this. I mean, Coach K and Duke in basketball is, I think, a great example. When he leaves, you're going to see how well, he's branded that name, or was it because of the coach? They've become so good, and great or whatever. I mean, yeah, if they got the right coach, could they put together some great years? Probably. But even think about Chuck Amato. He came to State. He was a State alumni. Things were looking great. Had things continued to stay great, do you think he would have stayed at State, or would he have taken the Florida State job if it was offered to him?
He would have gone to Florida State, without doubt.
Point taken. And then you're going to have some really good talent left over for the next coach. But if he sucks and he's a dud, you're going right back to where you were, 7-5, 8-4. And by the way, that's really cool. I mean, that's not a bad thing. Going to a bowl game every year isn't a bad thing. But having this expectation of Tom O'Brien that if he doesn't turn your team into a top 25 annual team and a contender in the ACC, then he's a failure. I think your expectations are a little out of whack. NC State,
well,
I'm not saying they couldn't have an aberration year and win the ACC. With the way the conferences are set up, it's very possible for them to do that. But to expect State to consistently churn out 6-2 ACC seasons and 10-win seasons in that conference with what they are, that's an unfair expectation to put on Tom O'Brien.
Well, what we're seeing here is Tom O'Brien is really in the Herb Sendek situation right now. You're getting the job done, right? Okay, we'll say 7-5, 8-4 is getting the job done. Herb Sendek was going to the NCAA tournament, which I think is better than comparing to 7-5. Going to the NCAA tournament is better than saying 7-5. I think the parallel to going to the NCAA tournament in basketball to football would be 8-4, 9-3. But here's my thing. Tom O'Brien doesn't bring any excitement to the program. Does that turn over into ticket sales? No, because State sells out every conference game anyway. It doesn't really matter. Football's just kind of that game. But when you don't excite a fan base and recruits at all, like, let's be honest, Tom O'Brien doesn't bring in recruiting. He gets out recruited by some of the other programs in the area. Like, he gets out recruited by ECU more often than people realize. He gets out recruited by almost everybody in the ACC. And he's made do with it. But right now, if you're going to get rid of Tom O'Brien, this is the time. Because next year, no matter what, NC State has to break in a new quarterback. So if you're going to break in a new quarterback, why not just break in a new offense? With everybody moving to kind of a spread kind of thing, you're never going to see Tom O'Brien move to a spread. Hell, they've tried this year. They've tried running the zone read with Mike Glennon, who, bless his heart, is no faster than me.
Yeah.
He doesn't fool anyone on his zone read. Defenses pray he keeps the ball because that's an automatic loss of 2. If he can get
very curious coaching decision to run the option.
If you're going to run the zone read, give it up. Yeah. Because Glennon's not going anywhere by himself. And usually when he does hand it off, the runner is stuffed because they know he's getting the ball. So I think this is your chance. Next year you're going to have a quarterback controversy. You got a battle in the offseason between Pete Thomas, who transferred from Colorado State, who was a 4-star recruit out of high school, and he can run. He played when he was at Colorado State. He can move. And then you've got a freshman right now who they had to burn the red shirt, who's backing up Glennon right now, Manny Stalker out of Pennsylvania. And he could also probably run this race. He's got some meat on him, but I think he's a lot more mobile than Glennon is. But I'm saying this is the time to bring in a new coach. Why not put a new system in right now? You got a new quarterback.
So just for the sake of change, we're gonna fire O'Brien just for freshen the mood.
I think at 7-5 with a schedule set up to where you should have been favored in 10 of them coming in, yeah, I would say that's failure.
Were they favored in the North Carolina game? I wouldn't have favored the.
They weren't favored in the UNC game, but
were they favored in the Miami game?
Yeah, they might have.
Were they favored in the Tennessee game?
No, they were not.
So wait. You just said 10 out of 12 games they were favored in. I've just knocked that down to 7.
Yeah, okay, well, let's rephrase this. Those were games they should have been competitive and won. They weren't competitive with Tennessee. Miami was just abysmal. And you got to put a lot of that on coaching, by the way. And because they were just out of position. They were not prepared at all. They should have lost to Maryland last week, who, by the way, is working on their 5th quarterback now. This week, Maryland is going to have a converted walk-on linebacker as their backup quarterback. So
well, in their defense if they lose, they were not prepared to run the option or to defend the option.
They've never been prepared to defend the option. Even, I swear, Even when they play option teams, they don't look real good against it.
That was
unless it's the Citadel, in which they were ready for it. But let's be honest, the Citadel runs about as well as I do.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I'm not going to get on TOB if they go 8-4, and I'm certainly not going to say anything if they win the bowl game and that goes 9-4, and I'm not going to say anything if they beat Clemson and somehow finish 9-3 and then go to a bowl game. If they beat Clemson and go 9-3, they're going to a really good bowl game. So I certainly wouldn't get on TOB's ass for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta think that his inability to excite a fan base, to recruit well, and to it just seems like there's just stupidity in every fourth quarter. Twice this year they've lost in games where they had the ball in a tie game, and it should have been the last possession of the game. Against Miami, Glennon got picked off trying to throw deep into double coverage, so I guess it's really not O'Brien's fault, but still a stupid play call. And then against Carolina here, at worst they should have been going to overtime.
If that kicker for Maryland had made that kick, do you think Tom O'Brien, like, what would you think his chances would be right now of surviving the off season? I got a feeling if he lost to Maryland last week, which they should, I mean, you're right, they absolutely should have lost. I mean,
which he should have, because a guy hit the upright from dead center
from 30 yards. God, so awful.
Come on. The kids at halftime run out there and kick that for free Dr. Pepper for life or whatever.
Yeah, that was a terrible miss.
And I couldn't believe it. And I actually tweeted before he kicked it. I tweeted, "Make or miss, O'Brien should be fired."
Yeah.
So, and he missed it, which is hilarious. And it was actually, O'Brien still only has one win now against Atlantic Division teams on the road in his 5 years at the team.
That kick might have saved his job, because, I mean, they lost that.
And they lost to Carolina.
Yeah.
They'd be 4-4 right now.
Yeah.
And there'd be a decent chance they finish 6-6 at best, because that team would go into the dumps quick. They're a 14-point favorite against Virginia at home this weekend. I have a ticket to the game. I decided I'm not going to go because I think I need to reevaluate where I am in life when I have some of these kind of irrational thoughts after leaving a stadium. So I think it's good. I'm going to get away. My goal is to not follow the game. We'll see how that goes. We'll see.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps up our discussion of the NC State, Carolina, and Tom O'Brien's future. I think we might need to break this up into a two-parter. Good stuff.
Yeah. All our friends up in the Northeast, stay safe. When you're locked in your house for the next few days because of the floods and everything, give the First and Short podcast a listen. You'll have plenty of time to catch everything. Click an ad and come back tomorrow. Thanks again.